For 73 years, the Korean demilitarized zone has been a frozen line where nothing changes, until last week. North Korea just executed a tactical shift so calculated, so precisely timed, that it caught South Korean intelligence completely off guard. This was not a missile test. This was not another round of provocative rhetoric from Pyongyang. This was something far more deliberate, far more dangerous, and it is happening right now in one of the most heavily militarized strips of land on Earth. By the time we are done, you will understand why the entire security architecture of Northeast Asia just entered its most volatile phase since the 1953 armistice. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because what I am about to show you is not being covered adequately anywhere else. The mainstream media is treating this as another North Korean provocation cycle, another predictable pattern of escalation and de-escalation. They are wrong. I am going to show you exactly what North Korea deployed along the DMZ in the last 14 days, why this represents a fundamental departure from 7 decades of military posture, and what it means for the balance of power on the Korean peninsula. We will cover the specific weapon systems involved, the tactical advantages they provide that Kim Jong-un has never possessed before, the strategic calculations driving this deployment, and the second-order effects rippling through Seoul, Tokyo, Beijing, and Washington. By the end, you will understand why this development changes the calculus for every major power in the region, and why South Korea's current defensive posture may no longer be adequate for the threat they now face. Let me start with the strategic context that makes this development genuinely consequential. The DMZ is not actually demilitarized. That name is one of history's more ironic misnomers. It is a 160-mile-long, 5-mile-wide buffer zone cutting across the Korean peninsula at roughly the 38th parallel. On paper, it exists to separate North and South Korean forces. In reality, both sides maintain massive military concentrations just beyond its boundaries, making it one of the most militarized borders on the planet. For the entire post-war period, North Korea's military strategy along the DMZ has followed a consistent pattern. They position massive artillery concentrations within range of Seoul, approximately 11,000 artillery pieces, according to South Korean military assessments. These systems, primarily M1978 Koksan 170mm self-propelled guns and M1989 240mm multiple rocket launchers, can hit the South Korean capital within minutes of conflict initiation. This artillery threat has functioned as North Korea's primary deterrent, their guarantee that any conflict would exact catastrophic costs on South Korea's economic and population centers. But artillery has limitations. It is static, vulnerable to counter-battery fire, and increasingly detectable through modern radar systems. South Korea has spent decades developing counter-artillery capabilities specifically designed to neutralize this threat. The K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzer, combined with advanced counter-battery radar systems and precision strike capabilities, has significantly degraded the effectiveness of North Korea's conventional artillery advantage. Seoul has also invested heavily in civil defense infrastructure, hardened shelters, and early warning systems that reduce vulnerability to artillery barrages. This is why what happened in the last 2 weeks matters. North Korea has not simply added more artillery. They have introduced an entirely different category of threat, one that South Korea's existing defensive architecture was not designed to counter. According to satellite imagery analyzed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, North Korea has deployed between 40 and 60 mobile multiple-launch rocket systems to positions within 3 miles of the DMZ's northern boundary. These are not the aging Soviet-era systems that have defined North Korean artillery for decades. These are KN-25 super-large-caliber multiple rocket launchers, a weapon system first tested in 2019 but never before deployed in tactically significant numbers along the border. The KN-25 represents a qualitative leap in North Korean strike capability. It fires 600mm rockets with a range exceeding 380 kilometers, placing not just Seoul, but the entire western half of South Korea within reach. More critically, these rockets follow depressed trajectories that make them exceptionally difficult to intercept. Unlike ballistic missiles that arc high into the atmosphere where they are vulnerable to missile defense systems, the KN-25's rockets fly low and fast, staying below the optimal engagement envelope for Patriot missile batteries and the terminal high-altitude area defense system. Each KN-25 launcher carries 4 rockets. Simple mathematics reveals the scope of the threat. 60 launchers means 240 rockets in a single volley. These systems can be reloaded in approximately 20 minutes. In the first hour of a conflict, North Korea could theoretically deliver over 700 precision strike-capable rockets against targets across South Korea, saturating defensive systems through sheer volume. But the deployment pattern tells us something even more significant than the numbers. These launchers are positioned in hardened revetments constructed specifically for this purpose. South Korean intelligence sources told Yonhap news agency that the construction of these positions began approximately 6 months ago, suggesting this deployment represents planned strategy rather than impulsive escalation. The revetments provide protection against counter-battery fire and airstrikes, indicating North Korea intends these systems to survive initial exchanges and continue operating throughout a sustained conflict. Now let's talk about what this means tactically. The KN-25's key advantage is not just range or firepower, it is precision. Earlier generations of North Korean rocket artillery were area weapons, useful for indiscriminate bombardment, but lacking the accuracy for targeted strikes against specific military installations. The KN-25 incorporates guidance systems that reportedly provide accuracy within tens of meters at maximum range. This transforms it from a terror weapon designed to terrorize civilian populations into a genuine military capability that can target command centers, airfields, logistics hubs, and hardened bunkers with meaningful precision. Think about what that means for South Korea's defensive strategy. The entire architecture of their defense against North Korean attack has been built on a specific assumption, that they would have warning time. North Korea's conventional military requires preparation for major offensive operations. Troops must be mobilized, supplies positioned forward, artillery ammunition distributed. South Korean and U.S. intelligence assets are specifically designed to detect these preparation activities, providing hours or days of strategic warning before attack initiation. The KN-25 deployment undermines that assumption. These mobile systems can launch from prepared positions with minimal additional preparation. They do not require the large-scale logistical movements that would telegraph conventional attack preparation. They provide Kim Jong-un with a capability he has never possessed before, the ability to deliver devastating strikes against critical South Korean military infrastructure with minimal warning, using systems that existing missile defenses struggle to counter effectively. Here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. The timing of this deployment is not random. It comes at a moment when South Korea's political leadership is navigating significant domestic challenges. President Yoon Suk-yeol's approval ratings have declined to 32%, according to recent Gallup Korea polling, weakened by economic headwinds and political scandals. His government faces criticism for being too confrontational toward North Korea and too accommodating toward the United States. North Korea has historically excelled at exploiting moments of South Korean political weakness. Kim Jong-un understands that a domestically weakened South Korean president has less political capital to pursue aggressive responses to northern provocations. This deployment sends a specific message. North Korea is strengthening its position while South Korea is distracted by internal politics, and there is very little Seoul can do about it without risking escalation that a politically fragile government cannot afford. But there is another dimension to this that deserves attention. These deployments did not happen in isolation from broader geopolitical developments. Over the past 18 months, North Korea has dramatically deepened its military cooperation with Russia. According to U.S. intelligence assessments shared with the New York Times, North Korea has shipped over 1 million artillery shells to Russia for use in Ukraine. In exchange, Russian technical assistance has flowed to Pyongyang, including expertise in missile guidance systems, satellite technology, and potentially nuclear submarine propulsion. The KN-25's guidance improvements may well represent fruits of this cooperation. Russian expertise in precision strike technology is world-class, and there is substantial evidence that technical exchanges between Russian and North Korean weapons engineers have intensified since 2023. If Russian technology has enhanced the KN-25's accuracy and reliability, this deployment represents not just a North Korean capability enhancement, but evidence of a functioning military technology pipeline between Pyongyang and Moscow. Now step back and look at what this means for regional power dynamics. South Korea's defensive strategy has relied heavily on U.S. extended deterrence, the guarantee that American military power would deter North Korean aggression and respond decisively to attacks. But the United States is simultaneously managing military commitments in Ukraine, maintaining readiness for potential Taiwan contingencies, and dealing with ongoing operations in the Middle East. American attention and resources are finite. Kim Jong-un is betting that this moment of American strategic overextension creates opportunity by deploying capabilities that complicate South Korean and U.S. defensive planning without crossing the threshold that would trigger major American military response. North Korea strengthens its position while the United States is least able to counter effectively. The second-order effects of this deployment extend beyond the immediate military balance. South Korea's defense industry has become a major global player, selling advanced weapon systems to Poland, Australia, and numerous other nations. Seoul markets these systems based on their proven effectiveness against the North Korean threat. If the KN-25 deployment is perceived as creating a gap in South Korean defensive capabilities, it potentially damages the credibility of South Korean defense exports. More immediately, this deployment will likely accelerate South Korean military modernization programs already underway. The Korean Tactical Surface-to-Surface Missile, known as KTSSM, is specifically designed to provide South Korea with its own precision strike capability against North Korean targets. The KN-25 deployment strengthens the political case for accelerating KTSSM production and deployment. Similarly, South Korea's indigenous Iron Dome-style system, the LSAM long-range surface-to-air missile, will likely receive increased funding priority. Japan is watching these developments with acute concern. The KN-25's 380-kilometer range cannot reach Japanese territory from DMZ positions, but North Korea possesses longer-range variants of similar systems that absolutely can. If the KN-25 proves effective and survives without triggering major international response, it validates North Korea's strategy of incrementally deploying increasingly capable systems while avoiding the threshold that would provoke comprehensive countermeasures. That pattern threatens Japan as much as South Korea. China represents the most complex element of this strategic puzzle. Beijing has historically opposed North Korean actions that risk destabilizing the peninsula, fearing refugee flows and potential U.S. military intervention near Chinese borders. But China's relationship with the United States has deteriorated significantly, and Beijing now views North Korea primarily through the lens of U.S.-China competition rather than peninsula stability. A stronger, more capable North Korea that complicates U.S. military planning in Northeast Asia serves certain Chinese interests, even if Beijing would prefer Pyongyang to pursue those capabilities through less provocative means. The KN-25 deployment puts pressure on U.S. and South Korean forces without creating the crisis that would force China to choose between supporting North Korea and maintaining regional stability. From Beijing's perspective, this may represent an acceptable level of controlled tension. Let me acknowledge the limitations and uncertainties surrounding this analysis. Satellite imagery can confirm the presence of these systems and their general capabilities, but it cannot reveal operational readiness or the actual precision these rockets achieve under combat conditions. North Korea has a documented history of parading weapons systems that later prove less capable than advertised. The KN-25 has been tested, but combat performance may differ significantly from test conditions. There is also legitimate debate among defense analysts about whether these systems truly represent the game-changing capability I have described. Some experts argue that South Korea's layered air defense architecture, combining Patriot batteries, indigenous Cheonggung systems, and integrated early warning networks, can handle the KN-25 threat more effectively than I have suggested. The Iron Dome's success against similar threats in Israel is frequently cited as evidence that modern air defense can defeat even saturation attacks. These are fair counter-arguments that deserve consideration. The effectiveness of the KN-25 against South Korea's actual defensive capabilities will remain theoretical unless tested in conflict, which hopefully never occurs. What we can say with confidence is that North Korea believes these systems provide meaningful military advantage, and they have invested substantial resources in deploying them. That assessment alone has strategic significance regardless of whether combat would validate it. We should also consider alternative explanations for this deployment beyond the strategic calculations I have outlined. North Korea may be responding to perceived South Korean provocations, including expanded U.S.-South Korea joint military exercises and the deployment of American strategic assets to the peninsula. From Pyongyang's perspective, strengthening defensive and deterrent capabilities may represent reasonable response to what they perceive as threatening allied military activities. There are also domestic political considerations within North Korea that external observers struggle to assess accurately. Kim Jong-un may be using this deployment to demonstrate military strength to internal audiences, reinforcing his credentials with military leadership, and projecting confidence to a population enduring severe economic hardship. The strategic calculations that seem obvious from outside may be secondary to internal political imperatives we cannot fully observe. Here is what we know with reasonable certainty. North Korea has deployed between 40 and 60 KN-25 mobile rocket launchers to positions near the DMZ. These systems represent qualitatively improved capability compared to North Korea's legacy artillery, offering longer range, greater precision, and operational characteristics that complicate interception. The deployment occurred over recent months through deliberate preparation rather than hasty improvisation. And South Korean and U.S. military planners are now adjusting defensive strategies to account for capabilities they did not face 2 months ago. The broader question is what this deployment signals about North Korean strategic thinking and future behavior. If this represents a successful incremental capability enhancement that provokes international criticism but no meaningful consequences, it establishes a template for future deployments. We may see additional KN-25 batteries positioned along other sections of the border. We may see longer-range variants deployed to threaten Japanese or even U.S. territories. The pattern of gradual capability enhancement without triggering threshold responses could continue indefinitely. Alternatively, this deployment may represent North Korea reaching the limits of what it can achieve through asymmetric capability development. The KN-25 provides tactical advantages but does not fundamentally alter the strategic balance on the peninsula. South Korea maintains overwhelming conventional military superiority when accounting for training, technology, logistics, and allied support. North Korea's nuclear weapons remain the ultimate guarantor of regime survival, and no conventional capability deployment changes that fundamental reality. What happens next depends largely on how South Korea and the United States respond. If they treat this as routine provocation requiring only diplomatic protest, North Korea gains without cost. If they respond with capability enhancements or operational adjustments that neutralize the KN-25 advantage, the deployment becomes expensive strategic failure. The next few months will reveal which outcome materializes. For viewers trying to understand broader geopolitical patterns, this development illustrates a critical dynamic of contemporary international relations. In an era when major powers avoid direct military confrontation, incremental capability enhancements below the threshold of major response become primary tools of strategic competition. North Korea is not unique in pursuing this approach. China's island building in the South China Sea, Russia's hybrid warfare tactics, and Iranian proxy force development all follow similar logic. Change facts on the ground gradually enough to avoid triggering comprehensive response. The Korean Peninsula remains one of the world's most dangerous flashpoints precisely because the underlying conflict has never been resolved, only frozen. The 1953 armistice that ended active combat created a temporary ceasefire, not a peace treaty. 73 years later, North and South Korea remain technically at war. Every new weapons system, every deployment, every exercise exists within this context of unresolved fundamental conflict. This is why the KN-25 deployment matters beyond its immediate tactical implications. It represents another layer of capability added to an already volatile situation, another system that could deliver devastating destruction within minutes if conflict erupts, another complication for military planners trying to prevent or manage crisis escalation. The audience that cares about understanding global security dynamics beyond headline coverage needs to grasp these developments in their full context. The mainstream media will report that North Korea deployed new weapons near the border, file the story under routine provocation, and move on. But the details matter. The specific capabilities matter. The timing and strategic context matter. The second-order effects on allied planning and regional power dynamics matter. This is why States News exists, to provide the analytical depth that helps you understand not just what happened, but why it matters and what it signals about future developments. The KN-25 deployment is not an isolated incident. It is part of a broader pattern of North Korean military modernization enabled by Russian technical cooperation and executed during a moment of American strategic overextension. Understanding that pattern helps you anticipate what comes next, rather than being surprised by each new development. The geopolitical landscape continues to evolve in ways that demand sophisticated analysis. New capabilities emerge. Alliances shift. Strategic calculations change based on technological developments and political conditions. The channel that establishes itself as the authoritative source for understanding these dynamics will serve an audience that refuses to accept surface-level coverage of a complex world. Stay subscribed, because this story is far from over. The deployment I have described today represents North Korea's opening move in what may become a sustained period of capability demonstration and strategic positioning. How South Korea, the United States, Japan, and China respond will determine whether this marks a new phase of peninsula instability or whether effective deterrence contains the threat these systems represent. Either way, you will want to understand the developments as they unfold, and States News will be here to provide the analysis that connects tactical details to strategic consequences.